Commander Gray stood at the gates of West Point Military Academy, his tall blue-skinned frame casting a long shadow in the morning sun. His 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession as he observed the ancient stone buildings before him. By the standards of his civilization, this academy was nothing more than a primitive training ground, barely worth the attention of the Stellar Coalition's military leadership. These humans still use stone and metal in their construction, he muttered to his aide, who diligently recorded every observation. Such basic materials. No wonder the council insisted on these diplomatic visits. They must need our guidance desperately. A group of humans approached from the main building. At their head walked a straight-backed man in a crisp uniform adorned with various medals and ribbons. Despite being shorter than Gray, the man carried himself with unmistakable authority. "Commander Gray, welcome to West Point." The man extended his hand. "I'm Commandant Smith. We're honored to host a representative of the Stellar Coalition." Gray looked at the offered hand with barely concealed disdain before remembering his diplomatic training and accepting the gesture. The human's grip was firm, firmer than he expected. "Yes, well, I look forward to observing your training methods," Gray said, emphasizing the word training in a way that made it clear he expected little of value. The Coalition believes understanding all species' military practices is essential for galactic harmony. Smith's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Of course, Commander. We're happy to share our methods. Though I should warn you, what you see here might surprise you." Gray's upper eyes narrowed while his lower ones scanned the grounds. Everywhere he looked, young humans in identical uniforms moved with purpose. Some ran in formations, others practiced with what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons, and still others sat under trees studying from actual physical books. "You still use paper for learning?" Gray couldn't hide his amazement. The Coalition moved beyond physical materials centuries ago. Smith's smile didn't waver. "We find value in all methods of learning, Commander, old and new. Speaking of which, would you like to begin the tour with our Historical Warfare Studies Department, or would you prefer to see our advanced combat simulations first?" Historical warfare. Gray almost laughed. Surely that's not relevant to modern military education. A group of cadets marched past, their boots striking the ground in perfect synchronization. Gray noticed how they maintained formation while simultaneously scanning their surroundings, including him. Their eyes held something he couldn't quite identify, a hardness that seemed at odds with their young age. "Commander," Smith said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "here at West Point, we believe that understanding the past is crucial to preparing for the future. Every war humans have fought has taught us valuable lessons. We study them all." Gray's aide quickly noted this peculiar approach. "How many wars are we talking about?" Gray asked. Smith's smile returned, but this time it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Why don't I show you our archives? The numbers might interest you." As they walked toward the main building, Gray noticed something else about the cadets they passed. Despite their primitive surroundings and basic equipment, they moved with a predator's grace. Even the ones simply walking between classes maintained awareness of their surroundings that reminded him of veteran Coalition special forces. "Tell me, Commandant," Gray said, trying to maintain his superior tone despite growing unease, "how long has this academy been training warriors?" "West Point has been producing officers since 1802, Smith replied casually. Gray stopped walking. "That's over 2 centuries before your species achieved spaceflight." "Indeed." Smith turned to face him fully. "We believe in building on strong foundations, Commander. Very strong foundations. Now, shall we begin the tour? I think you'll find our approach to military education quite educational." For the first time since landing on Earth, Commander Gray felt a slight tremor in his secondary heart. Something in the commandant's tone, combined with the disciplined energy surrounding him, suggested he might have gravely underestimated what he would find here. The tour was just beginning, and already his preliminary report needed serious revision. The first classroom Commander Gray visited left him deeply confused. Instead of the expected weapon drills or basic combat training, he found 30 cadets engaged in intense discussion about something called the Battle of Thermopylae. "You're teaching them about a battle that happened thousands of years ago?" Gray asked, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in confusion. "What possible value could that have?" Commandant Smith gestured to the holographic display showing ancient warriors in bronze armor. "This particular battle teaches lessons about using terrain, fighting against superior numbers, and the power of proper training. Lessons that remain relevant today." A young cadet stood up and began explaining how a small force had held off an army many times its size. Gray noticed how the other students took notes not just about the historical facts, but about specific tactics and strategies. "And how would you apply these lessons in modern combat?" Smith asked the class. The answers made Gray's scales tingle with unease. "Choke points remain effective against superior forces, sir," one cadet replied. "Especially in space warfare, where stable wormhole routes create natural bottlenecks." "The psychological impact of a small force standing against overwhelming odds can be just as powerful today," another added. "It's not just about winning the battle. It's about sending a message." Gray's aide frantically recorded these responses. These humans weren't just studying history. They were actively looking for ways to apply ancient combat principles to modern warfare. The next classroom was even more disturbing. Here, cadets studied something called guerrilla warfare. "Asymmetric combat," Smith explained, noting Gray's interest. "How smaller forces can effectively fight against technologically superior enemies." Gray's upper eyes widened. "But why would you need to study such tactics? The Coalition's technology far surpasses yours." Smith's smile remained perfectly pleasant. "We believe in being prepared for all possibilities, Commander. After all, one never knows what the future might bring." The morning continued with visits to more classrooms. In each one, Gray found humans studying warfare from angles he had never considered. They analyzed supply lines, psychological warfare, and even the impact of weather on combat operations. In one room, cadets were studying the evolution of weapons through human history. Gray watched in growing concern as they discussed how each new technology had been countered, adapted to, and eventually overcome. "Notice how they aren't just learning what happened," Smith said quietly. "They're learning how to think, how to adapt, how to overcome any obstacle." Gray observed a cadet presentation about something called the Art of War by Sun Tzu. The principles being discussed were disturbingly sophisticated for what he had assumed was a primitive species. "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting," the cadet quoted, making direct eye contact with Gray. "Your species seems unusually focused on warfare," Gray commented, trying to hide his growing discomfort. Smith led him toward their next destination. "Not focused on warfare, Commander. Focused on survival. There's a difference." As they walked, Gray noticed something else. In every classroom, alongside the historical lessons, there were star charts, maps of known space, detailed analysis of various alien species' known military capabilities. "Those charts," Gray pointed with a trembling finger. "They're marked with potential defensive positions, tactical advantages, strategic resources." "Of course," Smith replied calmly. "We wouldn't be doing our job if we weren't thinking ahead." Gray's aide had stopped taking notes, too disturbed by the implications of what they were seeing. These humans weren't just studying war. They were preparing for every possible type of conflict, against every possible type of enemy. And they had been doing it for centuries. "Shall we continue to the physical training areas?" Smith asked pleasantly. "I think you'll find our cadets' capabilities quite enlightening." Gray nodded numbly, his initial condescension completely forgotten. He had come expecting to find primitive training methods and simple military exercises. Instead, he had found an entire species that had turned warfare into an art form and was quietly preparing for conflicts that hadn't even begun yet. And this was just the beginning of the tour. Commander Gray's 4 eyes struggled to track the blur of motion in front of him. Two human cadets moved with frightening speed across the training mat, their bodies flowing through combat forms that seemed impossibly fluid. Hand-to-hand combat training, Commandant Smith explained casually. Basic skills every cadet must master. Gray watched as one cadet threw another clear across the mat. The thrown cadet rolled, absorbed the impact, and sprang back to their feet in one smooth motion. Neither combatant showed any sign of fear or hesitation. Basic. Gray's voice cracked slightly. My species considers physical combat obsolete, with modern weapons. A loud thud interrupted him as one cadet executed a perfect takedown. The instructor stepped forward, speaking loud enough for Gray to hear. Remember, weapons can fail. Technology can be disrupted. But your body is always a weapon. Gray's age shifted uncomfortably beside him. On their homeworld, physical combat was seen as primitive, beneath their advanced civilization. Yet these humans moved with a precision that made violence look like art. Perhaps we should move on to the environmental training facility, Smith suggested, leading them to a massive building. Inside, Gray found himself looking through observation windows into several chambers. Each one simulated different extreme conditions. In one, cadets marched through what appeared to be a frozen wasteland. In another, they navigated a scorching desert environment. Most species specialize in their preferred environment, Gray noted. You're training them for all of them. Smith nodded. Humans believe in being adaptable. Hot, cold, high gravity, low gravity. We train for everything. They watched as a group of cadets in heavy gear climbed a sheer cliff face in simulated high gravity. Despite the obvious strain, they moved with determined efficiency, calling out encouragement to each other. Notice how they work together, Smith said. Each cadet is tough alone, but in a group. He left the sentence hanging. In another chamber, cadets swam through murky water in full combat gear. Gray knew his own species would panic in such conditions, yet these humans moved with practiced ease through the hostile environment. How long can they keep this up? Gray asked, watching the underwater exercise. That's the interesting thing about humans, Smith replied. Just when you think they've reached their limit, they find a way to push further. They moved to an outdoor training ground where cadets were running an obstacle course. Not just running. They were carrying heavy packs, helping each other over walls, under barbed wire, through mud and water. This seems unnecessarily harsh, Gray observed, watching a cadet pull themselves through thick mud. Smith's expression turned serious. Commander, do you know why we push them so hard in training? Before Gray could answer, a cadet who had been struggling to climb a rope suddenly found new strength, pulling themselves up with a primal yell of determination. Because out there, Smith continued, in real combat, it will be worse. And they need to know, deep in their bones, that they can survive worse. The training ground stretched out before them, filled with humans pushing themselves beyond what Gray had thought possible for their species. None of them quit. None of them even seemed to consider quitting as an option. One more demonstration, Smith said, leading Gray to a final training area. Here, cadets were practicing with various weapons, but it wasn't the weapons that disturbed Gray. It was how quickly and efficiently the humans switched between them. Ancient blade weapons, projectile guns, modern energy weapons, they handled each with equal skill. Your people, Gray said carefully, they train with outdated weapons, even though they have access to modern ones. Why? A cadet nearby switched from an energy rifle to what looked like a primitive knife in one smooth motion, never breaking stride. Because, Commander, Smith answered, watching the display with obvious pride. We believe in being prepared for any situation. If our advanced weapons fail, we'll use simple ones. If those fail, we'll use our hands. If our technology is taken away, we'll adapt. We'll survive. We'll fight on. Gray felt his secondary heart racing. He had come to observe what he thought was a primitive training facility. Instead, he was watching the systematic creation of warriors who could fight anywhere, with anything, and who simply didn't know how to give up. And they were just getting to the advanced combat demonstrations. The gleaming research facility beneath West Point came as a complete shock to Commander Gray. After seeing so much emphasis on physical training and historical warfare, he had almost forgotten that humans had achieved spaceflight. "Welcome to our technology division," Commandant Smith said, leading Gray through sliding doors that looked suspiciously advanced. "This is where we develop and test new military systems." Gray's first hint that he had severely underestimated human technological capabilities came when they entered what looked like a simple testing range. A cadet stood wearing what appeared to be standard human combat armor. "Begin demonstration," Smith ordered. The cadet's armor suddenly shifted, plates realigning and changing color to match the background. Within seconds, the human had become nearly invisible. "Adaptive camouflage," Gray's aide whispered, shocked. But their technical specifications indicated that we were decades behind in metamaterial development. Smith finished the thought. "Yes, that's what they indicated." Gray's upper eyes narrowed. "You deliberately downplayed your technological capabilities." "We find it advantageous to be underestimated," Smith replied with that same calm smile. They moved to another section where cadets sat at control stations, their minds linked directly to combat drones through neural interfaces. The drones moved with impossible precision, executing complex maneuvers that shouldn't have been possible with human reaction times. "Our AI warfare division," Smith explained. "We found that combining human creativity with artificial intelligence creates some interesting possibilities." Gray watched as a cadet mentally commanded a swarm of microdrones to form complex attack patterns. The coalition reports said humans were wary of AI integration. "We are," Smith confirmed, "which is why we've worked so hard to get it right." The next demonstration nearly stopped Gray's hearts. A cadet activated what looked like a simple handheld device, and a small portion of space itself seemed to twist. "Localized space-time manipulation," Smith said casually. "Still in the experimental phase, of course." Gray's aide had stopped recording entirely, too stunned by what they were seeing. The coalition had assumed humans were at least a century away from such technology. They passed through a section where scientists worked with what appeared to be captured alien technology. Gray recognized devices from at least 3 different species, all being systematically studied and improved upon. "You don't just copy technology," Gray realized. "You understand it. Enhance it." "Humans have always been good at taking ideas and making them better," Smith agreed, "or finding ways to counter them." In one corner, Gray spotted something that made his scales pale. "Is that a prototype planetary shield generator?" "Oh, that old thing." Smith waved dismissively. "Just one of our backup defense systems. Would you like to see something really interesting?" Before Gray could decline, they entered a massive chamber dominated by a holographic display of the galaxy. Hundreds of cadets worked at stations around it, running what appeared to be combat simulations. But these weren't simple battle scenarios. They were full-scale galactic warfare simulations. "You're gaming out conflicts with..." Gray's voice trailed off as he recognized the species markers on the display. "With everyone," Smith completed the thought. "Every known species, every possible alliance combination, every conceivable technology level. We like to be thorough." Gray watched as the cadets efficiently worked through scenarios that included everything from full-scale space battles to covert planetary infiltrations. They treated each simulation with intense seriousness, learning from every virtual victory and defeat. "Commander," Smith said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "would you like to know why we showed you all this?" Gray could only nod, his 4 eyes fixed on a simulation showing human forces successfully defending against a multi-species invasion force. "Because we want the coalition to understand something. Humans don't just study war, or train for war, or develop technology for war. We master it. All of it. Not because we want to fight, but because we want to be ready if we have to." Gray understood the message perfectly. Human military capability wasn't primitive or behind. It was comprehensive, integrated, and deliberately understated. And this academy was just one of many. Commander Gray stood on an observation platform overlooking a vast training ground. Below him, what had started as a simple military exercise had evolved into something that made his scales crawl with dread. This is what we call a full-spectrum combat demonstration, Commandant Smith explained, as hundreds of cadets moved across the battlefield with frightening precision. The exercise began conventionally enough. Two forces of cadets, designated as blue and red teams, faced off across the training ground. But what happened next defied Gray's understanding of military operations. Watch carefully, Smith suggested. This is where it gets interesting. The blue team started with what appeared to be ancient warfare tactics, forming shield walls with primitive physical barriers. Gray almost laughed, until those same shields suddenly flickered with energy fields, blending old and new technology seamlessly. You combine primitive and advanced technology? Gray asked, unable to hide his surprise. We find that mixing old and new often creates unexpected advantages, Smith replied, as the blue team's shield wall advanced under heavy fire from red team's energy weapons. Then the red team demonstrated why humans were becoming known as terrifying opponents. They adapted instantly, switching tactics and weapons with practiced ease. Energy rifles were slung across backs as soldiers pulled out what looked like simple metal tubes. Are those primitive chemical projectile weapons? Gray's aide asked in disbelief. The answer came in a burst of gunfire that penetrated the energy shields, the old technology passing right through the advanced defensive screens. Modern problems don't always require modern solutions, Smith noted calmly. The battle evolved rapidly. Cadets switched between energy weapons, traditional firearms, and hand-to-hand combat without hesitation. Drones buzzed overhead, both autonomous and human-controlled, while ground teams moved with perfect coordination. How do they switch strategies so quickly? Gray wondered aloud, watching as the blue team seamlessly transitioned from defensive positions to an aggressive flanking maneuver. Humans are adaptable, Smith said. We train our soldiers to think, not just fight. Every cadet here knows that plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. The exercise intensified. Some cadets used stealth technology to become nearly invisible, while others employed simple mud and leaves for camouflage. Both methods proved equally effective in different situations. Gray watched in growing horror as the red team deployed what looked like simple smoke grenades, only to have the smoke interfere with advanced targeting systems. The blue team responded by switching to thermal vision, only to find that the red team had already adapted, using heat-masking ponchos made from what appeared to be ordinary emergency blankets. Your cadets, Gray said carefully. They don't just train with technology. They train to counter it, to defeat it. Of course, Smith replied. Any technology can fail. Any advantage can be lost. We prepare for everything. The finale of the exercise showed why humans had earned their reputation. Both teams suddenly united against a simulated alien force, combining all their previous tactics into a devastating display of coordinated warfare. Ancient battle formations protected soldiers wielding advanced weapons. Simple projectile weapons provided covering fire for troops using experimental energy blades. Primitive explosives disrupted shield systems, while high-tech drones swept in for the kill. This isn't just an exercise, Gray realized, his four eyes wide. This is a message. Smith nodded. Every cadet here learns that victory doesn't come from having the best technology or the strongest forces. It comes from being able to use everything at your disposal, old or new, simple or advanced. The exercise concluded with a display of combined arms warfare that would have given even the most hardened coalition general pause. The cadets had demonstrated mastery of ground combat, aerial support, electronic warfare, and psychological operations, all while seamlessly blending technologies spanning thousands of years of military development. Remember, Commander, Smith said as they turned to leave the observation post, What you've seen today is just a basic training exercise. These are students, not our veteran forces." Gray felt his secondary heart skip a beat. If these were just students, what were actual human military forces capable of? The implications made him wish he had never accepted this diplomatic assignment. The massive underground vault that housed West Point's military archives made Commander Gray's skin turn a pale shade of blue. Row after row of physical and digital records stretched into the darkness, each containing detailed accounts of human warfare. "Our collection of military history," Commandant Smith said, leading Gray down the central aisle. "Every conflict, every battle, every war that humans have ever fought, all carefully preserved and studied." Gray stopped at a random display. The holographic projection showed primitive humans charging across an open field, wielding simple metal weapons. "How old is this battle?" "That's from the 12th century, Smith replied. "Nearly 1,000 years ago. We were still fighting with swords and arrows then." Gray's aide started to take notes but stopped, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of warfare documentation surrounding them. "And these?" Gray pointed to another display showing humans fighting in massive mechanical vehicles. "World War II. A global conflict that reshaped our entire planet. 20 million military deaths, 40 million civilian casualties." Smith's voice remained steady, but his eyes held a deep sullenness. Gray's 4 eyes blinked rapidly in shock. "You killed that many of your own species in a single war?" "Yes," Smith answered simply. "And then we studied every aspect of that war to ensure we learned from it. Every victory, every defeat, every strategy, every mistake." They moved deeper into the archives. Gray noticed that each section was actively being studied by cadets. Young humans sat at research stations, analyzing centuries-old battles with the same intensity they had shown during combat training. "Here's something you might find interesting," Smith said, activating a large historical display. "This shows every major conflict in human history." The display lit up with thousands of points of light, each representing a war. The sheer number of conflicts made Gray step back in alarm. "Impossible," his aide whispered. "This would mean humans have fought more wars among themselves than most species have fought in total." "Correct," Smith confirmed. "And each conflict taught us something new, made us stronger, more adaptable." They passed through sections dedicated to different types of warfare: guerrilla tactics, siege warfare, naval battles, aerial combat, cyber warfare, and now space combat. Each area showed a clear progression of human military evolution. "Notice something interesting about our records?" Smith asked, gesturing to the various displays. Gray studied them carefully, then felt his heart skip a beat. "You've won wars while being technologically inferior to your opponents." "Many times," Smith agreed. "Technology helps, but it's not everything. Will, determination, adaptability. These often matter more." They reached a section marked Current Analysis. Here, dozens of cadets worked on applying historical lessons to modern scenarios. Gray watched in growing unease as they combined ancient military principles with advanced space warfare tactics. "This cadet," Smith pointed to a young human, "is studying how ancient Roman legion tactics could be adapted for space marine boarding actions. That one is analyzing how Vietnam War guerrilla strategies could work in asteroid belts." Gray felt a chill run through his body. "You're not just preserving this knowledge. You're actively adapting it for future use." "Of course," Smith replied. "Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and those who do learn from it are doomed to find new ways to wage war." Gray finished, finally understanding the full implications of what he was seeing. They stopped at the archive's newest section, which contained details of humanity's first contacts with alien species. Gray noticed how thoroughly humans had documented and analyzed every interaction, every technological difference, every potential military advantage or weakness. "One last thing, Commander," Smith said, activating a final display. "This is our analysis of potential future conflicts." The The display showed thousands of scenarios, each meticulously planned and counterplanned. Gray saw his own species featured in many of them. As you can see, Smith concluded, we believe in being thorough, very thorough. Gray stared at the endless rows of human military knowledge, each conflict adding to an ever-growing database of warfare expertise. He understood now why some species called humans the warrior apes. They hadn't just studied war. They had mastered it, and they were ready to apply those lessons to the stars. Commander Gray stood at the gates of West Point Military Academy one final time, but his posture was markedly different from when he had arrived. Gone was the confident, almost arrogant stance. Now he stood rigid, his four eyes constantly scanning his surroundings as if expecting an attack. I trust your visit was informative, Commandant Smith said, standing beside him as Gray's shuttle prepared for departure. Yes, Gray replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Very informative. His aide had already boarded the shuttle, clutching their data pad like a shield. They had stopped taking notes halfway through the archives tour, claiming their hands were shaking too much to write properly. Before you leave, Commander, Smith said, I wanted to share one final thought. Gray turned to face the human, noticing for the first time how the morning sun cast Smith's shadow. It seemed longer somehow, more imposing than it should have been. Everything you've seen here, the training, the technology, the archives, that's just one academy. One of many. Smith's smile remained pleasant, but his eyes held a steel edge. And this isn't even our most advanced facility. Gray felt his scales ripple with fear, not the most advanced. No, Smith confirmed. This is just where we teach the basics. A group of cadets jogged past them in formation, their boots striking the ground in perfect rhythm. Gray noticed how they moved with predatory grace, even in this simple exercise. He had stopped seeing them as students and started seeing them as what they truly were, warriors in training. I'll need to revise my report to the Coalition, Gray said, trying to keep his voice steady. Our previous assessment of human military capabilities was incomplete. Oh, Smith raised an eyebrow. And what will your new assessment say? Gray thought carefully before answering. He thought about the seamless blend of old and new technology, the adaptability of human combat techniques, the centuries of warfare experience, and the terrifying thoroughness of their preparation for future conflicts. The truth, he finally replied, that humans are not the primitive species we assumed, that your kind has turned warfare into both an art and a science, that underestimating humanity would be a significant tactical error. Smith nodded approvingly. A fair assessment, though you might want to add one more thing. What's that? That humans don't want war, Smith said, his voice growing serious. We study it, prepare for it, excel at it, but we don't want it. All of this, he gestured at the academy, is to prevent war, not start it. Gray's shuttle hummed behind him, ready for departure. By making the cost of conflict too high. Exactly. Smith extended his hand, just as he had when Gray arrived. We hope the Coalition remains our friends and allies. But if not, Gray took the offered hand, noting how much stronger the grip felt now that he understood what humans were truly capable of. Message received, Commandant. As his shuttle lifted off, Gray looked down at West Point through new eyes. The ancient buildings no longer seemed primitive. They were a reminder of how long humans had been perfecting the art of warfare. The training grounds were no longer simple exercise areas, but forges where living weapons were crafted. In his private cabin, Gray deleted his original notes about human military capabilities. His new report would paint a very different picture. He would tell the Coalition about a species that had mastered warfare before reaching the stars. A species that turned every defeat into a lesson, every victory into a stepping stone. A species that hoped for peace while preparing for war with terrifying thoroughness. As Earth shrunk behind him, Gray remembered Smith's final words, "Safe travels, Commander. And remember, what you saw was just the beginning." The implications of that statement would keep him awake for many nights to come. Because if this was just the beginning, Gray couldn't, and didn't want to, imagine what humanity's full military potential might be.